today I want to welcome Pete, who is a really inspiring person who has a story that will inspire many of us, all of you, I assume. And so I welcome you today, Pete. Thank you so much for your time with us. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your businesses, your activities, and help us get to know you a little bit better.
Wow. Thank you for having me. Yeah, you kind of hit it. Pete Tomasko, live in Sarasota, Florida. Currently one of the partners at Titan Placement Group. We are a healthcare recruiting company, and kind of our niche is working with nonprofits, mental behavioral health companies across the country. To find therapists, right? Additionally, I have a seat on the board of directors for Lightshare Behavioral Wellness and Recovery Centers, also here in Sarasota. And I do that, to volunteer, to give back, try to use my experience, of being an addict, living on the streets. Because of addiction, I ended up living homeless on the streets for a decade.
Mm.
2011, I finally found my way off of the streets, ended up here in Sarasota. So, which is now I call home, happily married, have a beautiful wife, dog, cat,
Mhm.
pretty active in the community, in recovery, also. And, I do a few extracurricular activities, outside of that, pretty avid runner, cold plunger, deep breathing exercises, meditation, all of the things that I consider to be normal to make sure that I keep my mental health where it needs to be.
Hmm. Yeah, it certainly sounds like you're tending to that, but also you seem to be bringing with you a lot of sort of wisdom based on your experiences that you're applying to your professional and personal life now.
I do. I do.
Yeah, which we'll dig into if that's all right.
Yeah, for sure.
So your story really begins with a deeply traumatic event, the loss of your mother in a tragic way. Would you share how that event has shaped your childhood and early experiences with trauma?
Sure. So when I was 10 years old, my mother married a guy. I have a sister also. She's 1 year younger than I am. When I was 10, she was 9. She met this guy. They ended up getting married. What nobody really knew, um, that he was beating me, um, behind the scenes, right? And the how that was able to happen for a significant period of time, and nobody really knew, or at least I thought nobody knew, was they both worked at Ford Motor Company. He worked the day shift. My mother worked the night shift. So this physical abuse was happening at night. So there was no way for my mom to know, right? And I didn't tell anybody about it because I was pretty convinced that he was not hitting my sister. The abuse was only happening to me. So, I remember my mindset at that time being that, if he wasn't hitting my sister, then I was willing to endure what was going on for as long as it took, as long as he wasn't touching her.
Mm. And that, I'm sorry, you go ahead.
No, and so what ended up happening, and I still don't know how it came to light, but eventually my mother found out, of course. As soon as she found out, she filed for divorce. We moved out immediately, moved back in with my grandparents, my maternal grandparents. And My mom was waiting, or my sister and I were waiting at school one day, for my mom to come and pick us up, and she never showed. Right. And so the next thing that I know is, somebody comes and gets us from the front of the school, takes us back into the school. Seems like just a couple minutes later, I'm in a principal's office or in some office. In the door walks in my grandfather and my 3 uncles, not my mom. Turns out that this guy was waiting for my mother a mile from the school in a parking lot. And when she came through an intersection, he pulled his car out of the parking lot into the intersection right in front of her car, got out of his car, walked over to her car. As she exited the vehicle, he shot her and killed her right there on the spot.
Oh my gosh, I am so sorry, Pete.
Thank
Yeah,
you. Thank
yeah.
you.
I'm sure that's a day that is just seared in your mind.
Yeah, yeah, it is. So, and so I know today, that that day completely shifted the course
Hmm.
of my life, of what things that should normally happen in the normal growing up period, from a child into a preteen, teenager, young adult, those normal things that typically happen where you learn to grow in from dependent into independence. All of that was thrown out the window for me on that day.
I can imagine. Yeah. And talk about it before and after. You had a day to day before and then totally different.
Yeah. And so I think how you know, having done enough work, over the past years that I've been in recovery, able to look backwards, right? It just left me in a place that I didn't feel connected to anyone because my sense of security was gone in the blink
Mm.
of an eye. Right. And so, and listen, and my sister and I were very, very fortunate in that situation that my grandparents had just retired, my mom's parents, and they were moving to Florida. This event happened in Cleveland, Ohio. And so my grandparents were getting ready to retire and move to Florida to live the golden years. Right. And so now their daughter is murdered. Right. My mom. So my sister and I were very lucky rather than and I would imagine that the struggle that they had to deal with was just as great, right? Because now they're not only had they lost their daughter, right? Their plans that they've worked their whole lives for to retire at 50 years old, move to another state, play golf, play pinochle, whatever retirees are supposed to do when they retire, was gone
Yeah.
because what they decided to do was to bring me and my sister with them to Florida and raise us all over again.
Wow. Yeah. Well, talk about the ripple effects of these kinds of events too. It doesn't just affect those directly affected, but those
Yeah.
on the periphery too. I
It
appreciate,
it
oh, you go ahead.
no, it was ripple effects, right? So it was pretty dramatic for me.
Hmm.
Um, my sister seemed to adjust a little bit better. My sister and my grandmother formed an amazing bond, in the years that follow. And not because they did anything different with my sister than they did with me, but that event it hit me in a different kind of way that no matter what my parents did, my grandparents did, um, I never felt a part of. We lived in a listen, we had everything that you would like. There wasn't a ton of money, but all the bills were paid. We lived in a beautiful home. My grandparents were home every day. They woke us up for school, made breakfast. They were there when we got home from school. We had dinner together, all of the trappings of a normal upbringing, but
Hmm.
I didn't feel like I fit in at all. When you talk about that, when you hear people say they have abandonment issues, right? That's just a broad brush when you say you have abandonment issues, right? It goes much deeper. And for me, it got to the point where I just never felt comfortable in my own skin. And it really didn't matter what I did, what my grandparents tried to do, because I did all the things, right? I played, little league sports, and we went on trips to Disney World. Um, I was just stuck. I was out there. I felt like I was in an ocean without a life preserver, paddling frantically
Hmm.
to just find some stability. And I just couldn't do it.
Oh gosh. There are a lot of things that I want to say for follow-up, but I'll try and keep it concise. I mean, there are layers to your story that even before the event that changed the day-to-day, like the structure of your life, you were
Hmm.
already being traumatized, so that you went into a big trauma with trauma in your background already. And then your description also of abandonment, like you were left.
Hmm. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that is
It was
so,
difficult. It was, I'm not, it was very, very hard
uh-huh.
for me, and I carried those feelings, And now I looking back, it very much shaped every aspect of my life,
Mm.
from the way that I interacted with friends, girlfriends, I've had a couple wives, you know, uh, nothing worked out, and I was doing the best that I could with what I had.
Mhm. Yeah.
It was
If
very
you,
it was very difficult.
I can, well, I can only imagine as much as I can imagine, you know.
Hmm.
If you could, if you would be able to ask for one thing or two things that you think would have been helpful during that time, do you know what those things might have been?
Sure. And it wasn't anything that was external. I wish that I had the ability. Let me rephrase that. I wish that I had the courage to feel like I could ask somebody for help and then trust them,
Mm.
because I also had obviously trust issues,
Hmm.
right? Because the one guy, um, that my stepdad, even before he was beating me, and it's so weird because like again, outside looking in, right?
Hmm.
I'm 9 years old, 10 years old. We got a house in the country. I've got a mini bike. I've got a go kart. I've got the BB gun. We're having fun during the day, and at nighttime he's a monster,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So there was, the trust. I didn't know how to trust people, so I didn't believe that I could tell somebody and they would believe what I was saying. So I couldn't, I wish I had a voice to be
Hmm.
able to tell my grandparents, I don't feel like I belong here.
Yeah.
Right. And there was no way that I just didn't have the capacity to get those words out. But that's what I was dealing with, is even in an environment where there was love, and there was stability, I didn't feel like I belonged in that house. And I
Hmm.
wish that early on, within a year or two after we arrived, I wish I had the ability to say to my grandparents, I need help. I don't feel like I belong here. Because I
Mm.
my grandparents would have gotten me help.
Yeah.
They absolutely would have done whatever it took.
That's so hard because the what you needed was available to you, and you're saying the thing that would have been helpful resided within you, which is courage and trust. But I
Yes,
can imagine at that age, it would have been hard to articulate even to yourself what it was that you needed.
sure.
Sort of a double bind. And then your description of what is behind the mistrust, which is you have this person to deal with who's kind to you during the day or acts like a normal father figure and then is a monster at night. And how do you live with both of those realities at the same time and be believed at the same time?
Yeah.
That's a lot for a 10-year-old boy.
Yeah, it is. Listen, I see, and for many, many years, and it was really hard for me to understand, but now I don't know what, probably because I'm getting better with understanding my own thoughts and feelings, and you know, um getting more comfortable in my own skin. When I see something on the news, and there's been a couple times when I've actually tapped my wife as we're sitting on the couch, you'll see a 10-year-old kid that has a tragic event not too dissimilar to what I went through. And I tap my wife and I'm like, babe, that's what happened to me. I like I know what that kid's, well, you know, uh, I know what he's going to deal with. Like his
Mhm.
mom was just killed in a car crash, or there's a lot of violence out there today, a lot of domestic violence, and I just think I feel horrible,
For
you
for
know.
those kiddos, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, that's trauma knowledge, right? Or wisdom that you take that's very unique to your experience that you can share with others. And it sounds like that's a big part of what you're doing in your life now.
it's important.
Yeah, it really is.
Well, maybe it is talked about enough, and I'm just not around to see it. But I feel like I could absolutely add another voice to the discussions that are going on.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. Yeah. So then after, your you have your history and you're struggling with being comfortable with yourself, and being comfortable in the context of other relationships based on what happened. And around 30, it sounds like you turned to substances and as you talked about, you were homeless for about a decade. Can you talk about how unresolved trauma may have contributed to this spiral for
Yeah.
you? If you characterize it that way, I don't know if you do.
No, so I'll tell you what happened, and then we can, talk about it. So I dabbled in drugs when I was 18 and 19 for a very short time, maybe a year. And I think, and I believe the only reason that it lasted a year or so was because of where I lived, right? I grew up in a small town, Brooksville, Florida. At that time, it was very, very small town. There wasn't a lot going on. I had never heard of addiction or treatment or AA or NA or all these other platforms that are available today to help somebody. So I didn't. I knew I was using way too many drugs, right? But I didn't understand that I had a problem. I didn't understand the word addiction. I'd never really heard of it. So I stopped. And I think the reason that I stopped then is just because there wasn't a lot of availability to it. It's like once you ran out of money, there's no more drugs. If you don't have money, you can't buy drugs.
Mhm.
And so I was able to stop for 9 years, you know, and during those 9 years, I did the typical, like at least what I call the typical small town thing, right? You kind of just, you get married, you have a couple kids or one kid, you find a job company that you're going to work for forever. For me, that was Walmart distribution. I stayed there for 9 years and just lived a normal-ish life, right? And then what happened was when I turned 30 at the very early January of 2001, I I tried cocaine again, like after 9 years, really not thinking anything about it, right? Other than, I mean, I remember the thought process when I did it for the first time. I remember thinking to myself, what's it going to hurt? Like it's been 9 years. What could really happen? Um, Probably shouldn't do it, but what the heck? It's a Friday night. We just came from the bar. Um, and I tried it that one night and it released something inside of me that I absolutely could not control. And it took about 9 months. Within 9 months, I destroyed everything. There was no, there was literally no furniture in the house. I sold all the furniture. There was no electricity. There was no running water. Um, my grandparents, my sister had kind of pushed me away because I was in this cycle. And it probably seemed like to them that I was unwilling to get help. But I would tell you today that I didn't even know there was help. I just knew that I wanted to use drugs.
Mhm.
That's what I wanted to do, and so I backed myself into a corner. And then in November of 2000, no, wait, let's see, November 2000. Yeah, November 2000. I remember thinking that I just need to get away for a little while, right? I just need to get away, go somewhere, somehow stop using drugs, get myself back together, and then I could go home.
Mhm.
But that's not what happened. I left, packed the last couple things that I had in the house into my little Honda, and I drove south on 75. In what was supposed to be just a month, maybe 2 months to go find help somewhere and go back home, ended up turning into 10 years later. I resurfaced. And during that 10 years, I literally had no contact with anybody, with any of my family, my friends, my daughter. My daughter was 10 at the time. Um, I just wanted to escape, and and drugs seemed to be the vessel to help me forget everything that I had carried with me from childhood.
Mhm.
It was the tool that allowed me not to think about anything at all. And so that's kind of what happened.
Yeah, for a moment you were set free, it sounds like.
Yeah, yeah. Definitely. I definitely loved. God, I don't know if I want to use the word loved. Enjoyed maybe is a better word for it.
Mhm.
I enjoyed the feeling of not having any responsibility, not feeling that mental burden,
Yeah.
of the past, and the present at the time. I was a young father, right? I didn't know how to be a father. I really didn't know how to be an employee, although I somehow managed to go to work every day because I knew if I didn't go to work, right, they turn the lights off type
Mm.
of thing, so I kind of just pushed my way through that. But it was a very freeing feeling when I was living on the streets of not, and I don't know if that sounds backwards, but there was definitely freedom in having no responsibility, no matter the cost.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I can imagine it's really freeing. And also, you have control to a
Yeah,
certain
I did.
extent. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
I did for sure.
And there's a couple of other thoughts that I had. One was that you've named, I mean, the transition into being houseless, and also when you were immediately after the passing of your mother, and living with your grandparents, you needed something that you didn't have, which was help.
Correct.
And you have now created a company that's designed to facilitate helping people get access to help. So I just kind of wanted to highlight that
Yeah.
connection. I don't know if that was intentional or what, but it certainly seems like something you knew that was a need based on your experience, perhaps.
Yeah, it for sure.
Mhm.
So I got into recruiting in 2000, let's see, 9 years ago. Let's just say that 9 years ago, right? And sure, I was only off of the streets here in Sarasota, for a couple years, 2014, and got into recruiting. In healthcare recruiting is a vast industry, and it wasn't too shortly after that I started to understand that, um, they're mental behavioral health therapists, right? Social workers, licensed clinical social workers. Like there's a whole bunch of people out there that help,
Mm.
right? Like that is, if I would have known that something like that was even available to me back then, um, maybe I didn't have to spend a decade on the streets, isolated from my family and friends,
Yeah.
right? And so I've just kind of pushed myself towards that, into that specialty, which is another reason that I have, I now serve on the board of directors for Lightshare Behavioral Wellness and Recovery Centers, right? Because what they do there is they offer inpatient, outpatient services to anybody that is struggling. I would say probably 70% of our clients, are, some form of substance abuse. But listen, I know for me specifically, like the substance abuse, is only the most, what's the word I'm looking for? It's usually predicated by something else, right?
Yeah.
There's always, the drugs are just the escape,
Hmm.
right, from what's really happening, and so we, at Lightshare, we have some amazing licensed counselors there. We have inpatient, outpatient. So I've just kind of decided to let my life be revolved in that.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so now I speak to people. I take meetings into the county jail here, with a couple other friends. I have a couple other service commitments here in the community, and it's all revolved around, mostly talking to men, but occasionally I'll be in a facility where there's co-ed, you know. But I feel like, and I don't even know if I would use the word calling
Mm.
or something like that, but I can relate to those people, right? And I know that they can relate to me. And if at the end of the day, right, if I can speak anywhere, and if one person just at least can identify with my story, then maybe they'll think that they have a shot and have some hope. Because at the end of the day, if you're, at least my experience is, because I experienced the same thing when I got into early recovery, right? You hear one person and they share in a meeting, and your story is not too dissimilar to theirs, and you think, oh my gosh, like, okay, if he did it, like, maybe, okay, and that's that little glimmer of hope,
Mhm.
And that's all it takes, right? You just need that one little glimmer of hope, and then maybe one day they get it from me, and then a week later they get it from somewhere else, and before you know it, they've got these, from hope shot to hope shot to hope shot, and it's like, okay, maybe. Um, and I think another part of it is, and I think the most important thing is the recognition or the understanding, maybe for the first time in a really long time, that you're not alone.
Yeah.
No matter what happened to you, somebody else has been through it,
Mhm.
right? It's happened to somebody else, no matter how tragic it may seem to you, right? In the moment, somebody else has been there. And to me, that's the biggest key, is to just know you're not alone.
Yeah, and that was again like a theme of thematically you were searching for that. And I was wondering if this moment that you just described in a meeting where you caught your glimmer,
Mhm.
if that was a moment where you felt belonging.
Of course,
Okay.
of course, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was something that you craved so badly when you're at home with your family. It's kind of interesting or ironic that that's where you find it.
Yeah, a couple things. I listen. I will tell you that there were a few. There were one instance that happened to me when I was on the street that just it just made it just, I saw like real listen, there's nothing good that's happening when you're living on the street and the only thing that you care about is using drugs. There's
Mhm.
literally nothing good happening. It's all bad and it's all tragic. Um, but I what happened so this one instance, I was in West Palm Beach, and um I was just looking for some food, like in some place to like wash something, right? And I asked somebody else that was living on the street. I'm like, hey, where can we get some food? And so I was directed to a place down near Riviera Beach, and so I ended up on a bus, and I ended up in this very community-based nonprofit homeless coalition type. Like they only dealt with homeless people, right? You can come in. I don't even know all the services they offer, but I do remember this when I walked into the front door. Um, just to help paint a picture, like when I was on the street, I could only imagine what I look like. Like it was just nonstop barefoot days and weeks, just turnover, right? And I'm awake for days and weeks on end, no shower, no food. I couldn't imagine what I look like. It couldn't
Mhm.
have been a pretty picture. But I walked into the front door of this facility, and the lady behind the desk um, took one look at me standing there, and she said, "Can you sit down right there?" So I sat down in the chair, and like a minute later, another lady came from out behind the thing, and she opened the little door flap, and she was like, "Can you come with me, please?" So I don't know where we're going, right? But I don't care where we're going. It's better than where I'm sitting right now. And so she took me into a back room, and she sat me down, and she went, and then she left me there for a second, and she came back in a couple minutes later, and she had a bucket in her hand with warm water and a wash rag.
Mhm.
And she proceeded for the next 5 minutes to wash my feet and rub my legs down. Right.
Mhm.
And then go get me a pair of clean socks and put socks on my feet. And then went and got me a 2 bag lunches. I'll never forget. It wasn't one, it was 2 bag lunches. There was just a couple sandwiches in there and some types of ho-hos or something. Um, and I just remember thinking to myself in that particular moment, I don't know how I'm going to get out of this, right? But I have got to hang on.
Mhm.
I have got to hang on, because there are still good people out there, right? And I just can't give up. And so then the next thing that happened, which was with my daughter, which absolutely was the one thing that absolutely changed the course of me getting off the streets and getting clean and getting into recovery and staying in recovery was so when I left in 2000, my daughter was 10, right? By the time I resurface, she's 21 years old, and we haven't said a word to each other. I haven't had any communication with my daughter, my sister, my grandparents, nobody from my family. I literally just disappeared. So shortly after I get off the street, within weeks, maybe even with days, I'm immediately in contact with my sister. She tracks me down. Um, it was a Saturday. I'm standing out front. I remember I'm talking to my sister, and we're just trying to get reacquainted. And my sister says, she says, there's somebody that wants to talk to you. And I remember thinking to myself in that moment, like, who could possibly want to talk to me? Who even knows I'm alive? And on top of that, who knows I'm here, right?
Mm.
But my sister said, Blaze wants to talk to you, and that's my daughter's name. And I just remember in that moment, just pure panic and fear and
Mhm.
anxiety, because the 10 years that I tried to forget about it was right here back in front of me. And my daughter is now 10, my 10-year-old kid that I walked out on is now 21. And that little girl that I ran from for so many years now is on a phone with somebody and wants to talk to me. So I remember thinking to myself, listen, I wanted to run. I literally wanted to just hang the phone up on my sister, run back into this halfway house that I was staying in, grab my little bag of clothes, and take off again.
Mm.
I wasn't, I had no capacity mentally, physically, spiritually to deal with this conversation. I didn't want to do it, right? But there was a part, but there was a part of me that just thought, Pete, you have to talk to this girl
Mm.
and just let the conversation be what it's going to be. But like, it starts now. You can't run anymore.
Wow.
You cannot run anymore. And at this time, I'm 42 years old. I'm
Mm.
42 years old, and I'm scared to death of this 10-year-old little girl. Right. and
Yeah.
so, and
Uh-huh.
so I just, for as much courage as I had in that very moment, right, I just said to my sister, I said, okay, okay. I said, just have her call me. Let's just get it over with. And so probably 2 minutes later, the phone rings. I look at the phone and I just answer it and I say, hello. And she says, hey, dad. And as soon as I hear, hey, dad, I just immediately start crying.
Oh
Listen,
gosh.
10 years
Hmm.
of guilt and shame and remorse, all of the things that you would imagine one would feel after they've abandoned their kid for 10 years. All of those emotions just came flooding out of me. And so I cried and I cried and I cried and I couldn't talk. I just cried. So at some point, I was able to regain my composure, right? Take a couple of deep breaths. And I said to my daughter one last time, coherently, I just said, Blaze, I said, I'm sorry,
Oh,
right? And her response to me was, it's okay, dad. We all make mistakes. And
sweet.
so, yeah. So, like, in that moment, like, she could have said a number of things,
Hmm.
and whatever she would have said, I would have had to been okay with. But, what my daughter did for me in that moment was free me from all of the guilt that I could have and probably should have carried. She gave me the freedom to continue to move forward in my recovery and on my journey.
Mm.
So that was just like, once the one thing that I feared the most, once that was off of my plate, which was my daughter, right? I was like, okay, you know what? Maybe I'm going to be okay. Maybe I will somehow slowly put my life back together again. But that situation with my daughter was definitely the catalyst that I
Mm.
thought, I'm going to do this thing.
What a
Because,
gift to
and
both of you.
oh man, she's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't
Yeah.
mean to interrupt you, Pete. Please continue.
Yeah. It's no, no, no. Go, go, go. So I mean, we have a as you read in some of the bio, right? Um, have a great relationship right now.
Mm.
Got two grandkids. I've restored all of the relationships with my family, aunts, uncles, cousins, of course, my sister. Um, I, I could not ask for anything more.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
my life today is far beyond anything that I thought it was going to be, when I first got off the streets, and I didn't even think that anything was possible.
Well, it's kind of it's like recovery joy, that
It is.
those
It is. Yeah, it
it's a
is. It
different kind
is.
of happiness.
Yeah. And so I will tell you this, that because I saw a couple questions in there, so I'll address one of them. I think what one of the reasons, and there's many, I'm sure, but the one of the reasons that I was able to um, rebuild a really good relationship with my daughter, right, is I recognized very early on that even though she had forgiven me and she gave me permission to be back in her life, that did not give me the permission to just put on the dad hat, right?
Mm.
And
Hmm.
because listen, she had some things going on in her life at the time, right? That did not give me permission to put on a dad hat, right? And start saying, do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that. I didn't do any of that.
Mm.
What I did was let her know unequivocally that no matter, and we would speak often, but I just let her know that no matter what she was going through, no matter what was happening, I was here. If you want to talk to me about something and you want my advice, more than willing to share it. But I didn't interject without her permission, right? I just let the relationship happen over time.
Mm. Yeah, you really approach that with integrity and thoughtfulness, and it sounds like you're reaping the benefits of having done
For
so.
sure. For sure.
Yeah, she sounds like a cool cat.
She is. She is. She's amazing.
There's so much judgment about people who are houseless and people who are addicted to substances, and there are these layers of your story that I think will help so much in um, softening judgment.
Hmm.
Like
Sure.
there are these pieces that were so important and critical in you having the ability to turn another corner, and one is somebody taking the time to wash your feet without
Yeah.
judgment. I mean, what a
Yeah.
beautiful moment,
I know, right?
Yeah. So just something as small as that, and then as you're describing this interaction with your daughter, her ability to forgive, or I don't want to assume she's forgiven, but she just was able to say, that's okay, I understand, and having that weight of guilt was another thing to propel you forward. And that's one of the things that I think a lot about with addiction is that we don't know the story of the person we're looking at. We just know what we're looking at. And if we perhaps had a little more compassion and curiosity in the moment, then we would have more opportunities to provide the glimmers that you're describing. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about your story. There are a lot of inspiring layers, but I guess I'm wondering, like, if you had been given those opportunities earlier, do you think it would have changed the trajectory, or did your timeline need to be your timeline, would you say?
Yeah, my timeline needed to be my timeline, but
Mhm.
I also believe, which is, one of the reasons that I'm, pretty big advocate of early recovery, early intervention, treatment, because I have a bunch of people, here in Sarasota in my recovery community, um, that they did not need to go to the depths that I did because there was an early intervention, in some form of mental health treatment or addiction treatment,
Mm.
which I believe, should always just be the goal, to just meet people where they are early in the process. If
Mhm.
you know what's going on, right? I mean, it's definitely a two-way street. You have to, the person that needs the help has to be willing to get help. That's, because if they're not willing to accept the help that's there, it's all for nothing,
Right.
and then sometimes, you get somebody, that doesn't know they need help or isn't sure or has trust issues or any other things, but if they're just around other people that are willing to help long enough, then, you have that one, maybe they have that light bulb moment,
Hmm. Yeah.
and they're like, oh, hmm, you know, um, it's important, empathy, for me, love and compassion and empathy, has to be the driving factor of it all.
No,
Because
absolutely.
there's so much. And listen, and I get it. I get the judgment. I understand. Um, and because if you look at from the things that I did to the people that I love, the most, and then to all the people that I hurt that didn't even know me, that just happened to be victims that were in my path. Um, they don't care that I was
Mm,
an addict or not, or they didn't care that my mother was murdered. All they know is not that I'm causing chaos in the community,
mm,
right? So I understand both sides of the coin, but something you said a couple minutes ago that I think is so true. You know, it's always served me well to ask questions from a place of curiosity, because when we truly at least for me, I believe that when we try to understand each other, then we can have some empathy, right?
yeah.
But if you're just looking at your loved one or a friend or whoever, that's stuck in a mental health crisis or in addiction or something, and you're just looking at the behavior part of it, there's so much more underneath it that's causing
Oh,
that,
yeah, there's always a
right?
reason for a behavior. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I just try to always understand what's going on,
Yeah.
and it's worked well for me, because especially for an addict like me, right? And it's always good for my spirit to stay out of the judgment game,
Mm,
right? There's enough of that in the world. If I need to operate from a place of love, right? Because there's so little of that in the world, right? I just choose to operate in that space. And if there's going to be any judgment and criticism, um, let it come from somewhere else. I don't want to be the place it comes from.
yeah. Well, it does cost the judger, you know,
Yes. Yeah,
emotionally.
it does.
It's
Yeah,
an
it does.
emotionally expensive place to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so like, talk about real quick, like light share, right? Another thing what I want people to know that are in a similar situation that I was not too long ago. Got to look at the big picture, right? I'm in Sarasota. I'm 42 years old, right? I'm just coming off a decade on the streets. I have not had any contact with my family and friends in a decade. I have no driver's license, no job, no credit. I have two black garbage bags full of clothes. And I am thinking to myself that my whole life is over.
Mm,
How on earth, right, at 42 years old, right, when some people are thinking about retirement, right? How am I going to put together any semblance of a life, right? Um, but I did,
mhm.
right? So the most important thing is, like, it's not over till it's over. It's never too late to start. It's never too late. Like, I did it, right? And I remember another thing was thinking that, how am I ever going to get a job? Like, how I have no social skills. I dropped out in the ninth grade. I've got no education whatsoever. Like, what am I going to do with my life? Right. But what ended up happening, what I believe is, like, when you're truly trying to do the right thing, like, people just show up in your life.
Mhm.
There are people that are meant to be in your life that will move you in the direction that you need to go, whether you need it or not. Right. Which is how I ended up in recruiting, and which is how I ended up on the board of directors. Listen, they asked me to sit on the board of directors of this place because I'm a drug addict and I lived on the streets for a decade. When
Mhm.
they heard about me, they came to me and said, "Would you please consider this?" Um, because of my experience, right? They wanted somebody like me to sit on the board of directors because I bring a unique perspective that nobody else is going to bring,
Absolutely. Yeah.
right? And so, just it doesn't matter about your past, right?
Mhm.
It doesn't matter. So if it's just for your listeners, right? If you're out there and you're listening to this, and no matter where you are, um, there's hope
Yes.
there, and it's never too late.
Never. Well, you said at 42, you thought your life was over, but it was really just beginning.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
listen, you just said something that was just really touched me, because I feel like there's an advantage now to where I am in life, right?
Mm,
And the advantage is this. Yes, at my age, I'm 55 years old, there's many people that I know that are, well, probably more along my sister's friends. But people are thinking about retirement, right? And they're not sure what they're going to do. I have still have all these wonderful new ideas of things that I want to do, right? Because there's a part of me that missed out on so much, right?
Hmm.
That I never got to do. And now I want to do it all, right? So I think that is what's going to help me stay young,
Hmm.
right? At heart, right? Keep me physically active, right? And so that's another thing that keeps me motivated and keeps me smiling every day, is because I do a bunch of whole bunch of crazy stuff that still scares me, right? And so I
Yeah.
see now it's a benefit. It works in my favor.
Yes. Yeah. Which kind of leads me to a question. I do have a question of curiosity for you around, and this circles back to something else you said a few minutes ago. It's about wisdom that you carry based on your experience that other people don't, and
Mhm.
that's why you are on the board of directors and in your positions that you carry. So, as somebody who has lived on the streets for a decade, you talked about how nothing good is going on in that context when all you care about is, finding, pursuing whatever substance you are addicted to. But at the same time, I'm wondering if there are things that you learned from that experience that you can only learn from that experience.
Yes, for sure. Um, oh my gosh, that's a great question. Yeah, that we that I yes, that trying to say talking to the audience. We are much more resilient than we give ourselves credit for,
Yeah.
right? Because what I think happens, what happened to me when I was out there on the street, is you just automatically kick into survival mode, and you will do, and it's not all bad, right? You will literally find ways to take a shower. You will find ways to eat, even if it means doing what I did, which was eating out of dumpsters and eating out of garbage cans. You will find ways to get things done, right? Um, I don't think if that never happens to me, if I don't ever have that experience, I don't know that I have the same tenacity that I have today in life and in business without that experience of being on the street, because maybe I'm still just like, well, it didn't go my way, whatever. Or this, you just can't, you're slightly playing the victim mentality,
Mhm.
right? But now that I understand that I'm pretty resilient in any situation, and I'm always looking for the biggest benefit is I'm always looking for the solution
Mm.
in any given situation. It is very rarely, and sometimes it drives my wife a little nuts that it,
Yeah.
because there's, it's not all peaches and cream all the time, right? Life happens to people, right? But even in the worst times, I'm just looking for the solution. It doesn't matter what the problem is. It doesn't matter what happened. Um, what's the next step? What's the solution?
Hmm.
How do we move forward?
Oh, I love that. And your referencing of resilience, sometimes I don't totally understand how we don't view those who figure out how to live on the streets as resilient just based on that in and of itself. So I appreciate you highlighting that. And the other piece, oh gosh, Pete, I could keep you forever, but I'm not going to rein myself in. Um, there are a couple of questions I just wanted to give you an opportunity to. I already asked that one in its own form. What advice would you give others who are struggling with addiction, trauma, feelings of hopelessness, particularly those who may be at a similar crossroads that you once faced?
Don't give up.
Yeah.
Don't, and I know that sounds cliche, right? But and the only reason that I say that don't give up is because I remember there was I was walking down the street in on Congress. I don't know how I still remember this stuff. I was in West Palm. I was walking down the street on Congress Avenue, and it was in the middle of summer. Here in Florida, it's like 200 degrees. I'm on my fifth day of no sleep, no food. And at some point, I just collapsed in the median and I laid down in the grass.
Oh gosh.
Right. And I just couldn't take another step.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I remember laying there thinking to myself, how did I get here? Like,
Mm-hmm.
how did I end up here? Um, and I just remember laying there thinking to myself, I can not stop. I can't give up. Right. And there were many times like I wanted to take the easy exit, hop in front of a bus, or something else like that, but you just I somewhere deep down in me, I just believed, right? No matter all the stuff that I'd been through, the early childhood trauma, all the stuff in addiction, so many years on living on the streets, I still believed that I wasn't supposed to be there. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a way out. I just didn't know where it was coming from or how it was going to happen.
Yeah.
And so I just kept putting one foot in front of the other. Right. And then you take the moments, the ones like, and there's many more that I won't bore you with, like the lady washing my feet, you eat with a bunch of homeless people, somebody gives you a couple dollars. There's a couple bright spots out there that just keep you going. Like, just look for the bright spots.
Look and notice.
Yeah, I
You've
like
been
that.
able to.
Yes, right. And so when I say don't give up, just because, hope is a very, very powerful thing
Mhm.
when you have it and when you don't. And
Yes.
when somebody loses hope, it's very hard to recover from that.
Mm. Yes.
Right. So that's why I would just say, just keep going. Listen, if you're in a situation, right, talk to somebody. Just start, and I said this on another podcast that I did, man, just keep telling people that you need help until somebody listens.
Oh, yeah.
Because at some point somebody is going to hear you on the level that you need to be heard and the
Mhm.
help will come. But you have to keep talking.
It's unfortunate that we have to ask more than once.
It is, but we've become so today's society is a little crazy,
Mm.
right? I mean, think about it. I was telling my wife the other day, it's like we had that attempted assassination on the president a couple months ago. Like,
Mm.
that was a story for like 48 hours
Mhm.
and we moved on.
Yeah. So
That's
don't really
crazy.
connect to anything.
No, right? It's just like so you have to keep talking. You have to keep asking for help. Just keep asking. Listen, even if you don't believe in God or whatever, right? Just know that there's something out there,
Yeah.
right? A higher power, right? That you can talk to in your
Mm.
most desperate times that's actually listening.
And everybody's worth being listened to.
Yeah. I love
Mhm.
being listened to.
Yeah, me too. Oh, well, Pete, I am gonna end it there. I want,
Okay.
unless there's anything else again that I didn't ask that you want to address. Is there anything else you want to say?
Yeah. I just to kind of stay on where we just left off, right? If I can do it, right? At 42 years old in a new town, life is just completely turned upside down, and you would remember thinking that there's just there this is going to be it's impossible. There's no way I can right this ship,
Mm.
right? You can. You can. You can absolutely do it, right? There is life after addiction. There is life after mental health crisis, right? There is life out there,
Mm.
but you just have to ask for help and then be willing to put in the work because there is a lot of work that needs to be done. None of this happened to me by osmosis, right? There are many hours of intense writing, constantly talking to I still go to therapy. I got a therapy appointment tomorrow, right? And I'm not ashamed to talk about it,
Mhm.
right? Because it's just what I need, right? And so it takes work and some of the work is hard,
Mhm.
right? And but the things that I have learned about myself that I didn't know. Like I often tell people that's the best part of this whole thing. It's like, because now I'm 55, like I sit down with my therapist and we start on a subject, and he's really, really good at what he does. He knows me really well. And then before you know it, he lets me reveal some own information about myself that I didn't know. And it's like, that's when you have those like light bulb moments that I call them,
Mhm.
right?
Oh,
It's
like there
like,
you are, Pete. Hello.
yeah, it's like, oh my gosh. I'm like, Bruce, I didn't even know that.
Uh,
So hang in there, right? Life's not all peaches and cream, but it's definitely worth living.
Absolutely. Gosh, what an inspiration. And thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
You
Yeah.
are more than welcome. And thank you for having me. And listen, if you ever want to do this again, just have your team reach out.